And now it's a big moment, like with all the shady colors. Hello, good morning to everybody, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk UX. So now we're live. I'm Alexis. I'll be the host of the day, and I'm very happy to welcome you all. Today we're joined by the awesome Joe Leech. That will be our speaker of the day. So hi, Joe.
Hi, Alexis. How you doing?
Nice to meet you. Very good. And you?
Yeah, good. Thank you.
Cool. So just before we jump into the questions, I'll just finish up the round of introduction to talk to you. So today's episode is going to be like a very special episode because this is the last one before the BAD conference happening next Thursday. And today with Joe, I'll be speaking about psychology myth he's going to debunk. So looking forward to that. And also how to manage change in your design and with your user. Just around the presentation, Joe is a consultant, a UX consultant and product coach, author of Psychology for Designer, an awesome book that I recommend everybody to read. And he has worked with many international brands like eBay, Disney, Marriott, or Booking.com. For the people just logging in, I see people a lot connecting. Say hi to the chat to everybody. Please share what you do, where you're coming from. Enjoy this moment to network with fellow UX. If it's the first time you do Let's Talk UX webinar, so the format is pretty clear. We don't have slides. We're going to go with Joe with a 45-minute conversation, like about the psychology and change, and then we'll have 15 minutes questions. So if you have a question during the talk, go to the Q&A tab and we'll get to question in the end. You can upvote as well. So depending on time, we'll select the first ones at first. So end of the intro, this is the webinar for the BAD conference, which is happening next week. So if you don't have a ticket, get one. You even get like a discount that should pop up now. Joe will be speaking there, like also a lot of different speakers we had, like Dr. Nick Fine, Susan Wainshank, and it's happening the 4th of June next week. It's all about behavior and psychology. Then also Joe next week, in 2 weeks, it's going to handle a workshop. Can you tell us a bit more about the workshop?
Yeah, so it's kind of a deep dive on my background in psychology and the psychology I've used over the last sort of 15 years of building great products and user experiences. So I share all of my techniques for using psychology in a really practical way. So small psychology hacks through to sort of larger scale innovation through psychology and better interaction design through psychology as well.
Okay, so you should.
And I think there should be a discount from that somewhere as well.
Exactly.
Got one of those as well somewhere.
So something popping out. Yeah, exactly.
There it is. See, look, magic.
Magic. So this is your discount code for this workshop happening remotely, of course, and all about the techniques of psychology from Joe. Exactly. Last thing, this episode was prepared by Tech Circus, our awesome partners, and Testing Time, which I work with. So we are a UX recruiting startup. We recruit test users for UX researcher, product teams all over Europe, sometimes US as well, remote and in-house, now less, but we do also direct studies and quantitative recruitment. And the key difference is that we do in 48 hours. So if you want one more, ask question, check our website, and I think you should have a last offer. And then we can start finally. But I don't see the offer popping, but we'll go down to the talk. So Joe, awesome to talk to you and very curious. Yeah. So could you present yourself a bit for the audience in a few words?
Yeah, so I will. So my background is I studied originally neuroscience. So my background's in kind of cognitive biological psychology in essence. I did that about quite a few years ago now. And then from that, I was a few years as a primary elementary school teacher. And then from that, I then did a master's course in human-computer interaction. So this sort of theory behind user experience. That course was human communication and computing. So how humans communicate with each other and how we communicate to technology or mediated through technology. So I did a lot of work around that. And then from there, I kind of got into user experience probably right in the early days. So about 2003, I really started. Okay. And over those sort of the last however many years, I've worked for sort of big agencies like CX Partners, like a big UX agency. And alongside that, worked with some really amazing organizations. Like I helped led the relaunch for Marriott.com in 2014 in a huge number of sort of 38 countries, 18 languages. Wow. The redesign of Trainline, which is the UK train ticketing service, in 2010. I worked on the rollout of Disney's brand new Disney.com across EMEA. I worked for eBay on the launch of some kind of high profile stuff like shopping cart, things like that. And then the last kind of 5 years, I've worked as a product and UX coach. So I coach teams in doing better work. So I work with teams who are kind of in-house UX product managers, designers, to kind of do better work, to make better product decisions, be truly user-centered, deal with difficult stakeholders, which is what I spend a lot of my time using psychology for. And actually what I talk a lot about in my workshop is using psychology to get good work done. And just generally doing the right things in the right order for the right reasons, really, is what I try and do, and help my product teams to do the same. And I work with kind of big folks and startups, so 50-50 big enterprise companies through to high growth scale-ups through to startups as well.
Okay, awesome. I mean, your experience is quite like very broad and very relevant. So we'll go deeper into it like at the end of it, because it's really, I mean, building the right thing in the right order for the right reason. It's like, I mean, it sounds so simple but so hard to do.
For so many reasons, definitely.
Yeah, exactly, for so many reasons. Yeah. And I think we're going to start like some of the reasons you're going to talk next week is about this psychology myth. You're going to talk. Could you enlighten us a bit about what's coming somehow?
Yeah, I mean, for me, really, I've found it quite frustrating over the last 15 years of organizations and startups who read a blog post or read a newspaper article about some psychology and kind of take it as being truth, or that everything that's published out there is the way it is. And the reality is a lot of psychology there's so many myths out there with psychology, and I've written about them a lot. There's a lot of them in my book. I'll talk about them in my bad talk. But there are so many, not fake studies, but studies that have been debunked or that are simply not valid and not relevant to psychology in the modern era. So they've been repeated. The studies have been repeated, and the same results haven't been found. Or worse, there's no real empirical scientific evidence for those theories in the first place. And in my talk, I'll break down kind of 5 really quite high-profile psychology theories into why they are a myth, why they are not true. But then practically, also, I of course use psychology in everything that I do. So I make sure everything that I'll go out there and study and look at is something that's practically relevant for people to be able to use as well. So that's kind of what my talk is about and what I do. Okay,
yeah, I think it's really needed at the level of the industry because there's so many like misunderstanding. And actually, in your book, you call that somehow a lot of pop psychology.
There's a lot of pop, and I think a lot of it's high profile, like pop psychology, like nudge and persuasion and that sort of psychology. And it has its validity, and there is some scientific validity to it, but the effects that can come from sort of the pop psychology side of it is small. It's negligible in terms of the results it can actually achieve for your businesses. As I've never come across an organization or a business that's been truly successful through using pop psychology. Actually, apart from one, and I can talk about those folks.
Okay.
Booking tend to use it pretty well, but they use it
in a stressing way. I mean, in the bad way, we know that.
Well, not bad. I mean, they just use a lot of it, so it can feel to the user quite grimy and dirty, and they don't quite know why. But a lot of it, certainly the sort of the darker side of persuasion stuff, what it does is it raises levels of anxiety amongst the people who are using it, which is great if you can use that anxiety to convert. It's good for you as a business, but it's not a very nice feeling you get as you're feeling anxious that hotel room's going to sell out. That feeling of anxiety is not a positive emotion. And I think what I don't like so much, and what I rally against, is using negative emotion to sell. And I think there's a lot of organizations that go too far down that route. And it should be a lot more positive in its approach, not negative.
No, actually, you dive into like a question. I've been talking with many UX people. It's like we do this bunch of research, and we know like how it impacts the emotion of the people, etc. The thing is, it's good for the business, but somehow it's bad for the user, but still converts.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it comes down to, I mean, a lot of it will convert, and we are running businesses at the end of the day, but it's at what cost? And it's often at short-term gain for long-term customer experience, and really, proper long-term customer experiences. You might improve and get a sale right now, but you're going to get a repeat sale. So a lot of it can be quite short-term in its thinking. And I think that can work for profits for this quarter, but not necessarily a way of building a business that is loved and liked. That's what it comes down to. Is it's who do you want to work for? A business that kind of sells loads of great things to people that maybe don't exactly need them or want them at that point, versus a company that people love. And there's a difference between how you can use psychology for both of those two.
Have you seen that the effect of this anxiety and psychology tracks over the long terms of the brand? Because I guess as researcher, the struggle is like, it will work, but it's hard to argue it's over the long term, like without showing proof.
Yeah, I mean, you can see it. I mean, often it comes at the cost of things like, and the classic example used is Ryanair, which is like the low-cost airline here in, a lot in Europe, mostly in the UK and Ireland. And they use a lot of it to the kind of stuff that Harry Brigner talks and calls dark patterns that almost are verging on trickery to get people to do something they're not particularly honest. And everybody hates Ryanair, and it's not, the flight product isn't bad. It's not the best in the world, but it's not the worst in the world. You get on a plane, it takes you somewhere. But that feeling of coming off the booking of a flight on Ryanair, you don't feel particularly. It's not like going on holiday. Or vacation. You should feel great coming off after you book your flights, but you feel a little bit grimy from having to get through the constant sales pressure they're putting you under. And that's not the best way to start a vacation or a holiday. It should be a positive experience. And often with Ryanair, you kind of put up with the difficulty of doing it for the cheap price, or worse, because they've driven everybody else out of business because they are the cheapest. That Ryanair are the only airline that fly from your airport to where you want to go to. So you have to use Ryanair, despite everything they try and sell and throw at you. That's a classic example there, is Ryanair of not being particularly well loved as a business because of a lot of the dirty sales practices they
it's like making a bargain with the devil. Like you use it, but it's like know what you're getting into.
You do. And I think a lot of people do that with Ryanair. They know what they're getting themselves into. They're sort of, okay, I'm going to book a flight on Ryanair. I've got to get ready for this. This is not going to be easy. And it can be really challenging. And I've worked with a couple of brands who started out like that, who wanted to shift to be more of a customer champion. And what's interesting is very, very hard to shed that myth of being, to shed that reputation of being not particularly, on the right side of the ethical line. It's very hard to shake that. It's almost impossible to do it once you start down that path. As soon as you start down that path, you get known for that. It's very difficult to shift and move away from that. Short of a rebrand and a rename, you might get there, but still it's impossibly difficult for people to forget a lot of those experiences, because they're quite, and I think all experiences that are either strongly positive or strongly negative people remember them more. It's an effect called the Pollyanna effect, where we do remember things that have a stronger emotional value to them, and that's both positive and negative. And so you remember the bad and positive experiences more than you remember the average experiences. And I think that can be really important for repeat business.
And especially the negative experience, we are biased against the negative.
And it can also be self-reinforcing as well. So a lot of that anxiety can make you. It's interesting. You see that a lot with news websites, where they structure and use a lot of negative emotion, and that negative emotion can be strangely addictive to people at the same time. So there's publishers in the UK is very well known for this, of just being sensationalist, hyper anxiety raising. This thing causes cancer, this thing does that, and you feel like you should be reading it to know what's going on. The anxiety feeds on itself, and it's quite a horrible place to be for people that are almost addicted to that feeling. It's kind of a weird way of looking at things. It's that
it's like
feeding into the negative emotions of us humans can be extremely powerful to build a business on, but what kind of business are you going to be building
Mm-mm-mm. Yeah, it's like the clickbait thing as well with all the news organizations and the pressure. Like always, people get the 10 things you need to see, and it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah, and us as designers, we've got responsibility and product managers for that. If you're putting things on your website, it seems really simple, only 5 left, that creates a tiny amount of anxiety, and that a lot of what I talk about in my workshop is just being aware of that, being aware that you're creating that anxiety amongst your users. You just think, it's harmless, it's a harmless thing and it increases sales, but these things are never harmless. These things are never, there's no such thing as kind of neutral design. I had this bit of a conversation with Jared Spool about this. He has this scale where he talks and says, there's design is either positive or negative, it's positive, negative, or neutral. And I have this view that there's no such thing as neutral design. You're either one way or the other. And I think any design choice you make can push you to being more positive or more negative. There's no such sort of neutral middle ground when it comes to design.
Yeah. And
I think that's the mistake that a lot of unsavvy design folks make, is they think design is just good, bad, or neutral. The reality is it's not that simple.
Yeah, exactly. I would say Mike Montero speaks about like every design is political, and especially what you don't design or design.
Yeah. I think if you don't believe that, I think there's a lot of naivety around, certainly among more senior stakeholders in our industry, that design they don't really truly understand that about design. They think it's, we want it to look great like Apple. It's not looking great. It's more than looking great. There's a whole series of emotions around that make you engage with that brand, and there's a whole level of different sets of psychology beneath that.
Yeah, and actually you're putting the finger on something which is, I think, so important, but it's the big battles in the product teams that UX people fight every day. Like how do you get to convince your clients to about this aspect of anxiety and emotions that is highly not quantifiable? And that's kind of the friction. Like now we try to, as UX, quantify what we do. We have some return on investment, like these kind of things. But all these emotions talk is like, it's always subjective. So other people on the other side of the room will kind of look at you. It will be like, it will be your opinion against mine. So that's highly, I would say, challenging too.
And I think early on in my career, I think I was quite naive, thinking that I could work with senior stakeholders and say, if you do this, is the right thing to do. This is ethically the right thing to do. And the reality is that argument is everybody's ethical line and position is different. And the reality of what to convince somebody of to advocate an idea is difficult. It's really challenging to advocate very well and that's the kind of, as a junior person in my starting out, advocacy was one of the skills that I wish I'd had been stronger in, and it's something as you get more, and it's what I spend a lot of my time coaching teams to do now, is to be better advocate their ideas. And that can come from a variety of reasons. And the reality is, in modern business, you need to truly understand how that business makes money, or that business is not going to make money in a way that you like. So if you understand how business makes money, you can start to talk to them about the reasons behind why something is a good idea and not a good idea, and counter any arguments that are going to come back to me, like only 5 left on a product page. Yes, you're going to sell more, but at a cost of something else further down the line in terms of repeat business. So repeat business is going to go down. There's a metric you can look at and quantify there. And you're right, you can't quantify emotion. And anytime I do love UX people, bless them, but there's a lot of this kind of, they'll come up with abstract scales for emotion and things that don't mean much, except if you're a user experience person. And the reality is you've got to just frame all your arguments in terms of sort of either business or some sort of more stronger framework to advocate your ideas. I've got a whole conference talk about advocacy of design ideas. And you can't just rely on like, that's a bad idea, or that's emotionally causing anxiety. People can be like, so what? That's not a scale that other people can judge it around. So any framework or scale that you come up with has got to be shared across the organization. Otherwise people are not going to respond to it and understand it. And I think UX is a bit guilty of that a little bit, is they don't understand, there's not a strong enough understanding of how business works. I've written some stuff around a business guide for UXs actually. And it's important to know that stuff. So I think that was the biggest learning for me, is that however right you think your idea is, or however right it is for the user, it doesn't matter if you've not put it in a advocated that idea in a framework that the other people in the organization or the business itself can understand. You know, you might just be shouting and screaming, and that's a surefire way to, you know, anxiety yourself and, you know, you not enjoying your job very much.
Yeah, exactly. You need to cater to the audience, basically what they understand.
Absolutely right. Yeah.
No, cool. And because you mentioned it at the start of the conversation, how would you use, I would say, science somehow, or psychology for stakeholders? I was planning asking a lot of questions about psychology for designers, for users, but somehow we got on track of stakeholders and advocacy.
Well, ultimately, they're the more challenging audience a lot of the time. Often, if you're good at UX, you do the research, you know what your users need. It's simple. Your job is then to convince the organization that that's what you should do, and that's the hard bit. You know, let's not. You know, it's easy to go out and ask 10 people what you think. That stuff's, you know, anybody can do that. It's then how you take those ideas and you plan what you're going to do as an organization with those ideas. That's the hard, challenging, difficult part of user experience. And I think that's the bit that people, again, you don't realize that. You don't think it's that difficult when you set out. You're like, oh, I've got these 10 great ideas. Brilliant. And, you know, if you can't advocate those ideas well, you're not going to do very, very well. And I think with stakeholders, the key really is to understand not all stakeholders are the same. Not all humans are the same, which is, again, a thing I talk about in my conference talk, is we don't all respond in the same way to the same set of stimuli. So stakeholders are different. So you're going to have classically your chief finance officer who's going to respond well to money and spreadsheets and data. That's what they spend their time in. If you need to advocate an idea, advocate it in terms of financial incentives for the business. If you're working with the CTO, you need to frame everything in terms of technology. And again, CTOs are very technical, scientific people. So they will be looking for evidence for what you're trying to do. It's always CTOs and that element of the business that always requires more evidence. If you're working with, say, a chief exec, CEO, they may be more of a people person. And if they're more of a people person, you tell stories. You give them stories to understand how to improve the user experience. You've got to understand what buttons to press with your stakeholders from a psychological point of view to help them understand why what you're talking about is a good idea. And again, it ain't rocket science. You've just got to know what they respond to in terms of what they going to work with. There's a really good book actually called Dealing with Difficult People that helps frame this. I'll share a link in a minute. It's really good stuff.
I mean, all the sources you're mentioning, like your talk, your book, this Dealing with Difficult People, were added as well at the end of the webinar in the notes.
Okay, great, fantastic.
And with the crowd.
And all of this stuff we're talking about here, this is much more of the focus for my my workshop, is I will talk to you about how to use psychology to get and understand how users think, but then to use that to then advocate it to the business so that the business does that. Your product team will make the changes that you've uncovered through your research.
Yeah, exactly.
And a whole framework for both of those things, because that's the hard bit. That's what my workshop mostly is about.
Okay, yeah, no, but definitely I think you're pointing something so right. And I would say in my experience as a UX and working with testing time, we see a lot of research being done over and over, which because they were not able to convince the people. So in the end, it kind of is like infinite loop of, doing research that, not going to learn anything new. It just, new piece of evidence.
We need more numbers. We need more, that, and that's another trap that people fall into with research, is thinking that qualitative research is quantitative research. Oh, you've only spoken to 5 people. It's ridiculous. We need a statistically significant number. Well, you're confusing the different types of research here. And again, a lot of what I do with the product teams I work with, is understanding what the right research technique is to understand what you need to do next. And that's, again, not everything can be solved through user testing or user research. There's many different research methodologies you can use to help get the data you need, but also in a format that then you can use to advocate that to the rest of the business.
Yeah, and in one in your talk as well, you mentioned something really interesting, that, for example, a product manager, or can be designer as well, but let's say in this case, a stakeholder, a product manager who don't understand about psychology is like an architect that don't understand physics. So I mean, my question with this would be, like, should we also educate, like, how should we educate the stakeholder about psychology? Should everybody knows about psychology, or how should we share that internally?
I mean, I think it's a challenging point. You can use psychology, you can introduce some psychology to explain a reasoning behind why you're doing something. I don't think you should try and educate all your stakeholders into all psychology. Psychology is vast as a field.
Yeah.
But you can use certain psychology theories to advocate ideas.
Okay.
I think Susan Vicek, she talks a lot about this. She uses a lot of I think she's another 100 ideas for what psychology studies that designers should know, and they can help you. You can go, oh, I'm planning this thing. Oh, this is a great piece of psychology for me to use for this thing here.
Yeah.
And she talks a lot about that. So it's kind of bite-sized stuff where you can say, oh, we as a team are doing this because of this psychology theory, and that can work pretty well. But I think anytime you try and give stakeholders too much information to frame an answer, they're just going to switch off.
Yeah.
They just don't. And that's kind of classic human way of doing things. If there's a lot, they've got to understand a full framework and then just your answer, your reasoning behind it. That's quite a big ask for them. So actually, one of the conference talks I do is in fact, my workshop as well, I've got a lot of my frameworks are very stakeholder friendly, as you can probably tell. So they're very quick to introduce to get people to understand why something is going to happen in the future. So a lot of what I try and do is use psychology to be predictive in terms of if we do this, this will happen in the future. And that, again, can help us understand if we plan this product change, we think this will happen in the future, and how to set everything up as a team to test that, research that, and to launch that thing as well. And that's one of the talks I gave. I gave it UX Live a couple of years ago, that one, and you can go and find the video for that.
Okay.
It's on my website, mrjoe.uk. So if you find my website, there's a lot of my conference talks are there.
Okay.
And that can be really helpful.
Okay, awesome. We'll add this as well.
But a lot of what I'm going to be talking about at the BAD conference is myths. So this is psychology theories that have not got the scientific evidence to back them up. And that's the dangerous place to be, is if you're using psychology that you haven't properly, thoroughly gone back and looked at to test if it's actually valid or not. If you're using that to launch a new feature, or worse, a startup launching a new product, which I've seen based on psychology that's out of date, not valid, that's a dangerous place to be. And, you as user experience, product managers, designers, you need to have the skills to smell bad psychology. If it seems too simple and too good to be true, it probably is too simple and probably too good to be true. And I think I'm going to talk a lot about that in the BAD talk that I talk about. I mean, a classic example is there's a big study done in the 50s by a guy called James Vickery in movie theaters, and he would it's a very famous psychology study. People would sit down in the movie theater and he would flash one frame, eat popcorn, flash one frame, drink Coca-Cola. So this is called suggestion, psychological suggestion. Very famous psychological theory. Did this in 1957. He built a huge advertising empire off the back of it, sold his advertising company for millions, wrote his memoir in which he'd admitted he made up the whole thing. Yeah. There was no validity of him flashing up, buy popcorn, and more popcorn sales going up. He made the whole thing up. Yet this kind of subliminal suggestive psychology has got so entrenched in modern day narrative that everybody thinks that's the case. If we flash up on our website, buy this, that people will buy something. Is that priming and suggestive psychology? There's no validity behind it. None of that works. Yeah. And I'll go into a whole thing in my BAD talk about why priming, which is again getting people to think about something before they do a task. There's no psychological validity behind 90% of the priming psychology studies that are out there. Yet whole books and careers have been built on this psychology. So you've just got to be armed to smell bad psychology when it comes up, and that's what I'll talk about.
Okay. Well, I think it's
and in my book as well.
Yeah, it's in your book, Psychology for Designers, right? Cool. No, I think you're just right on point, and it's perfect to actually for us to switch gears somehow to the change, actually the psychology change offline, because you launch actually a lot of websites, new redesigns, and you're you call yourself somehow like the one who is cold when things goes wrong. So actually, I think it's something that is so usual. And it's something as well. I talked with Dr. Nick on my last webinars, and he was saying that basically UX the framework of UX is how you bring, let's say, predictability, like you mentioning when you're going to launch. So the product manager is not going to freak out. It's like, I don't know what's going to happen somehow. So from, let's say, all the cases you've been called to be a fireman, what are, let's say, the three main things people should look at or be somehow prepared when they change something big in the product?
Yeah, so the three reasons I get hired. So part of what I do is I come in as a fixer when something goes live and it goes wrong. And it happened to me, the first time it happened to me was very early on in my career. I was working for Mensa. So Mensa were sorry, not Mensa. I have worked with Mensa. It was Which, who the Consumer Association in the UK. They Consumer Reports is the US version, and Which had a question and answer forum, and I worked on this very early in my career. And we did amazing amounts of user research. We redesigned the QA forum for these experts. So there were like 20 to 30 part-time Which experts who would answer questions on TVs and cameras and phones and that kind of stuff. Okay. So we redesigned the whole thing, and we launched it on a Monday. Launched the new one, and it was resoundingly hated by everybody. And it was far better. We did all the user research we did. Everybody said this is far better than one we've got now. It's so much nicer, so much easier to use. But we put it live, and it was resoundingly. It went down like a lead balloon.
Yeah.
And it was an important lesson for me early on in my career, because everything in the user research that it was going to go great. Everybody loved it. Everybody loved the thing that we were showing them. And admittedly, the user research we were doing, we were paying them 30 euros for an hour session of their time. So anytime you're paying somebody to look at something, they're going to like it. We did a lot of that kind of work around user research for this thing, but it was very, very different from the thing that was there before. Mm-hmm. And the reality is, of the people that really disliked it the most were the people that were using it the most, the 20 to 30 volunteers or part-time people who were using this every day. Yeah. And they built up. So in one of my conference talks, I talk in my workshops, I talk about the two types of memory, and there's two types of memory. So procedural memory is how we store memories and how we store processes in our head. And step one helps us remember step two, helps us remember step three, step four. Everything is encoded as a sequence. Yep. So to do something in any platform, you've got step one, step two, step three, and each time you do a step, it helps you remember the next step. That's how we are hardwired in our brains to do things. So of course, we changed everything as part of those sequences. And the new thing was far better for people who were new to Which, who were like, oh, this is great. This is really intuitive to use. The problem being is that people who were using it every day had built up a bad or an incorrect way of building these sequences of procedural memory up. They'd spent a long time using something that was broken. Mm-hmm. And so built up this kind of muscle memory of how this thing worked. And then when we launched the new one, of course, the new one was harder, more difficult for them to use. And so those 20 to 30 people were like, this is awful. We hate it. It's taking us so much time to do our jobs. We hate this thing. We hate it. We hate it. We hate it. And they caused so much fuss that they were phoning, emailing, faxing. They were sending fax to the head of Which to turn this thing off. Obviously, the CEO of Which freaked out. It's like, this is ridiculous. We've spent all this money on this thing. Let's turn it off. This is bad. This is really bad. What have you done? What have you done? You've destroyed it. You've upset all our experts. So they turned it off. Oh, wow. Sorry, that's my dog. Dude, it's okay. It's okay. Yeah, he doesn't like it as well. Exactly. It was an important lesson. Dude, it was an important lesson for me. There's the dog.
Yeah.
It was an important... Oh, go on. Calm down, sit down. Life, hey?
Yeah,
it was an important lesson for me in terms of understanding that people don't like change. And that's why they don't like change, is that there's this effort involved in building up processes in terms of doing it. So the thing I always get called in for the most is when there's a big change all in one go. And it doesn't matter if you do things in beta, if you do a private launch, all of this stuff, people still hate change no matter what. If it's an expert system like an online grocery shop or something people use all the time, or online banking or something like that, they were going to hate the change no matter what. And the biggest mistake you can make is switching the new thing off and going back to the old one, because you can never then relaunch. And Which I was working with, they spent hundreds of thousands of pounds on this thing. They turned it off, never saw the light of day, never went live.
Wow.
Because the experts didn't like it. And as soon as you cave to that behavior, you can never make a big change ever again in your organization. And the reality is it would take people sort of 5 to 6 weeks and they'd be fine with the new one. They probably prefer it, but it's going to take time. There's going to be a backlash to something new. And a lot of what I do is I'll come in and say, just hold steady. Yeah, you've launched a new thing. Yes, it's better. I've seen the research. Things will get better. Numbers will return. You've just got to expect a dip when something new launches. That's simply what happens when you launch something like that. There's going to be a dip. The days of us launching something brand new and the numbers suddenly going through the roof are long gone. So, there's going to be a dip. People are not going to like that new thing that you're going to launch. And you've just got to, figure out as an organization how to manage and mitigate that risk. Yeah. And that's the big thing that people do wrong.
Yeah,
that's the biggest one.
I think people are never prepared somehow to take that back.
No, people never are for that amount of change. They always think they are. You can never be prepared enough for a big relaunch ever. Things will always go wrong. And you've just got to be prepared for things to go wrong. You've got to warn everybody, all the senior stakeholders, hey, people are not going to like this because people don't like change. Give it 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks. People will trust us. The numbers will return. And that's often what I get called in to help organizations with, is to trust in the work that they're doing, and that there's going to be this blip where something new people don't like.
Yeah. No, I think it's so much important in our industry to have this knowledge and confidence about, the work of the people, since everything now digital, so you can switch it from, one code and another.
Yeah, exactly. Turn the old one off on a Friday and you turn the new one off on a Monday. Yeah, that. Not that you do that ever, obviously, but yeah, you get the point.
Do you know maybe any kind of evidence of study actually about the subject, or okay about it?
What was that? Sorry, Alexis, you broke up a little bit there.
Yeah, okay, sorry. Do you have any study or scientific study or evidence from the field that can help people convince stakeholder about this?
I mean, no, nobody wants to talk about these things because you don't want to let because often the organizations this is most important for are large, like banks and online supermarkets who've got shareholders, and they don't want to release figures that or things that make them look bad. So afraid not. No, there's very little out there. You can look at psychology around change. There's lots of psychology papers written around change, but there's not around a lot. And there's a lot of organizational change style stuff out there, but nothing about launching digital products at that scale and when things go wrong. I mean, you can anecdotally you can find stuff online, but the reality is there isn't much there.
Yeah,
it's experience really. What it comes down to is if you've ever been through a big relaunch, it's horrible. It's scary.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's great and it can be great, but often than not, it's not.
And have you seen maybe any difference between B2C and B2B? Or is it like the same approach?
Yeah, no, B2B is often worse for this because B2B often it's expert systems that you're working with. So B2B, you need to be even more careful. I mean, B2C can be a big thing if it's like an online supermarket that people are coming back to every week, or internet banking when they're coming back to it. Those are the two examples I often see with B2C. But B2B can almost be worse because it's professional users who are using this as part of their job. And they're probably maybe using your software 2, 3, 4 hours a day. You change it all, that's going to be so tough for them. And from a B2B point of view, that can really destroy your organization if you've not managed that properly. If you've got a big product that you're planning a big change for, and you get that change wrong, you can lose customers, even not now, but the next contract cycle. It's really difficult to manage it. And it's not about beta versions and this, that, and the other. You've just got to be prepared for it. There's so many ways you can mitigate it, and beta versions is a way, but not the way necessarily in terms of doing it.
Yeah, you don't think there's a way to somehow prepare users or like?
I mean, you can, but no, nobody likes change. How important is the question of ethics? I think somebody's pretending to be me here.
Yeah, it's funny. I think it's a big marker that kept this question from last time. Because we did a webinar with Susan Wainshank and we talked about ethics, but I don't know why it jumped on.
Who knows?
I didn't press any buttons. Mystery of live webinar.
It's a good question, though.
Yeah. But please answer. Like, if you have an answer last time from the webinar, please answer it. We'll check the result at the end. Yeah. We still have 5 minutes left actually. And actually, a last question about change. Actually, something is happening with one of my clients. So I was curious about it. it's a big B2C brand, and they rebranded actually already 2 years ago, and they just like spent so much money on ads, etc. And now they've been rebuilt, and they're going to change branding this year. Like I know you have a very strong opinion on it. Like, what do you think it's gonna happen?
It depends how. Is it a name change as well?
Sorry, yeah.
Is it a brand new name? Yeah, I mean that's really hard because you build up a lot of cachet with the brand that you've got, and name is really, really important. If you change the colors and the logos, and that a lot of people don't really ever really notice that kind of level of deep change. I think the biggest challenge I see with rebranding is doing too much. So the second thing I get called in to deal with is people trying to do too much in one go. They're like, oh, we're going to do a rebrand. Oh, we might as well do a redesign. Oh, we might as well re-platform the technology at the same time. They'll do 3 things at the same point. And it's like so much risk associated with just one. So the smoke detector is going to go off.
Oh, wow. Oh. All right, guys. So we have something live happening. And the dog is going crazy at the back. So let's see how long it goes. Well,
sorry about that.
No,
life.
Hey.
So the second thing I get called in for a lot is trying to do too much in one go. So relaunch, rebrand, re-platform, rebrand, redesign all in one go. Each of those has got associated risks. Mm-hmm. If you re-platform, obviously your technology might not stand up. If you redesign, the design might be not optimal. If you rebrand, the brand might not be exactly right. And if you launch all 3 on the same day and it all goes wrong, you don't know which one's the problem. Mm-hmm. You don't know. Is it the brand? Is it the design? Is it the platform? And you can't then troubleshoot if all 3 are going live in one go. You can't mitigate that risk if all 3 are happening at the same time. So this is the biggest piece of advice I give anybody in a large organization. Don't be tempted to do all of those things at the same time.
Yeah, I think it's...
I've written about this a lot, actually. And you shouldn't re-platform and redesign at the same time. You should just not do that, because the risk associated with redesigning and re-platforming, especially in B2C and B2B, is just too high. Don't do the 2 at the same time. It's like, it's dangerous. And that's the big thing I get called in for, is they've just done too much in one go and don't know where when it's gone live and they don't know what the problem is.
Yeah.
What's causing us problems now? And it's like, well, it's challenging.
I think it's an invaluable piece of advice, because it's, I would say, a pitfall many people goes in, like as long as, so maybe it's a psychology effect somehow with Stakeholder. Like once you get approved something, like no approval, you say, okay, it's less hassle to do everything.
Exactly. Oh, we're replatforming. We might as well redesign. It's cheaper to do it now than doing it later. We might as well. And we're trying to sell €1 million redesign in, and our stakeholders were like, well, it looks the same as the old one. And it's ridiculous. So they redesign, thinking that's going to help sell it in. And the reality is you can't, and you shouldn't ever do those 2 at the same time. If you're planning that, get in touch. Okay, because your stakeholders need to hear it, and they might hear it from you, but often they need to hear it from somebody else.
Yeah. And you have also other problems you're called in more often.
What was that, Alexis? Sorry,
my microphone, I think, is junking. Do you have other problems? What are the other problems you're being most called?
Those 2: big change in terms of a platform for users. Number 2, trying to do too much in one go. I've actually written a blog post, which is the 4 most common things I get called in for.
Okay.
The other one is choosing the wrong partner. So choosing a tech partner to redesign, or a redesign partner to retech, which happens all the time. Choosing a large management consultancy firm to do your redesign and relaunch. Again, there's big issues associated with all of those things, and I talk about it in that post about the big 4 things, 4 reasons I get called in to do it.
Okay, awesome. I have like 1 or 2 last questions. Like, for you, what is the most undervalued skill in UX today?
Advocacy, being able to advocate your ideas to stakeholders. Anybody can research, anybody can wireframe. And I don't mean that anybody, but you know what I mean? Those 2 skills are easier to get hold of. The reality is it's advocacy in terms of the business. That if you can't do that as well, you need to think about where you want to take your career in terms of the direction. Not everybody can do it, don't get me wrong. It's not an easy thing to do. but you need to think about where you want to take your career based on the skill set that you've got in UX, because UX is too broad to really be a proper discipline anyway. I have a lot of issues with the term UX anyway as a discipline. I don't think it is, but we can talk about that another day.
Yeah,
there's a couple of questions in the QA actually. Do you want to chat about those, Alexis?
Exactly, because we reached the time of the end of the
almost up, aren't we?
Yeah, exactly. We're very on time. So we'll check it on the question. People, if you have other questions, please answer. Ask the question and we'll get that. So we have the first question from Maria. Can you tell us which user emotion should the design address most? What design should arrive in the end user?
Which design should arrive? I can't answer that. You've got to decide which emotions you want to create in your end user. If your business wants to be positive, to be negative, you've got to decide as an organization. That's not up to me to tell you. Okay, I've told you the good and the bad about, only 5 left, or the pressure-led sales stuff, but that's up to your organization to decide what's ethically acceptable and what's not. Not up to me to tell you.
Mm-hmm. No,
what do you suggest to do in order to smooth the acceptance of change in the user experience? You can never, ever make it smooth. You can warn people that it's going to be bumpy, but you just got to be prepared for it being bumpy. It's not going to be a smooth thing. And the biggest piece of advice I can give you is be prepared for the bumps. Be prepared for it to go wrong. Warn everybody that things are going to go wrong and accept it. The CIA say, what is it? Plan for the worst, hope for the best.
Mm-mm.
That's what you should do with any relaunch. Okay, and what kind of evidence have you found works best with stakeholders? It depends on the stakeholder. Some stakeholders respond to stories if they're more human people. Some stakeholders respond to analytical data if they're more technically driven. It depends on who the stakeholder is as to what buttons work and what better. I mean, the best kind of evidence has got stories and human emotion associated with it. Look at this user. They're struggling with this thing. It's difficult. Here's 100 users in the data struggling with the same thing. That's the perfect piece of evidence, is a story with numbers to back it up with. And the best kind of research you can do is qual to tell stories, quant to back it up with numbers. Qual first to understand what's going wrong and understand it, quant to give it volume and numbers to back it up. Always put those two together, never one or the other, both. Okay. How would you recommend developing your advocacy skills? Practice, 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 practice. In my workshop, that's what we do. We spend a lot of time advocating ideas with psychology, and you just practice it with your colleagues. The reason I've done this is because of this. The reason I've done that is because of this. You practice it. The only way to do it is to practice it, practice it, practice it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
there's a talk I've got called How to Design with Science and Not Destroy the Magic. You can watch that. That'll help you. That'll give you some ideas. But everybody's got their own way of doing it. I've got my way of doing it. You've got to have your own way of advocating ideas. And it's finding your own style that you're comfortable with.
Yeah, and the trick, I guess, is like every organization has its own style as well.
Yeah, exactly. Every stakeholder has their own buttons. It's not a simple process of going, oh, this one works the best. It's never that simple.
Mm-mm-mm. Yeah, I have a joker bonus question that actually was from my list about psychology. You talk a lot also about forms and the psychology of forms. I was wondering maybe if on the user journey today of like what people experience, like e-commerce, is there something also like we as designer, we break all the rules of psychology in the journey somehow?
Yeah, I mean, with forms and with e-commerce generally, you've got to understand, this is a whole answer. I've got a whole massive blog post I'm just writing on this. But you've got to understand there's 2 types of purchase. There's considered and non-considered. Non-considered is things like batteries and phone cases and stuff. It's like, yeah, I'm going to buy that. Boom, $15, bought it. There's considered purchases like cars or vacations or houses or clothes, and they take time. And considered purchases are a very different e-commerce journey to non-considered purchases. Non-considered purchases, you just get their credit card, get it done, get it delivered. Amazon do non-considered purchases brilliantly. You just go on, buy it, arrives tomorrow. Considered purchases are a different thing. Buying a car is different from buying a phone case. It's a big deal in terms of the differences between the two. I've got a conference talk about this as well, which you can sort of see again. And I'm preparing a big blog post about this as well. But you need to know the differences between those two.
Okay, awesome. And I think we have a last question from Beatrice, actually, that came up. In a startup environment, how do you manage the communication with investors when you start interfering with design?
Investors should not be doing anything with the user experience. Investors should know better than getting involved in user experience. I've done a lot of stuff with startups. They should be kept away. They should have opinions, and you should say, that's a great idea, thank you very much. We'll put that in the backlog, but they should not be, they can't help themselves because they're experts, especially angel investors. Angel investors are the worst kind, because angels believe that they've somehow got magic, and that their magic is that they're there and they understand what's going on. You've just got to distance themselves as much as possible. So it's on the backlog, or find out ways of advocating what they do, but don't try and take it on head on in terms of dealing with an investor, because they're always going to beat you because they've got money. So you need to think about ways of circumventing what they're talking about. But angel investors are the most challenging to do that with, definitely. Yeah. VCs will know. VCs are much better at knowing when to step back and trust you. Angels are a little bit more challenging to deal with.
Okay.
I could talk about that for ages. So it's just a quick answer. Sorry.
Would you let's say collect the stakeholder feedbacks and try to hide it somewhere and still show it has been done, or just collect the feedback? It's like, wow.
Depends. I've got a technique I use called the decision diamond, which is like a diamond of 4 points. Okay. And it's got things like gut feel, which is like what an investor would come to you with. It's got business, it's got user research, it's got data. And there's 4 points to this diamond. If for something to be a good idea, it has to meet at least 2 points of that diamond. So it has to have business drive and gut feel. Mm-hmm. It needs to have data and business drive. So I've got these 4 points. If it's got all 4 points, an idea's got all 4 points of the diamond, do it. If it's got 3 points, prioritize it. If it's got 2, think about it. If it's got 1, you need more evidence for it. Simple as that. Decision diamond. Have a look on my website. It's great. It'll help you with this sort of stuff in terms of advocating why something's not a brilliant idea. It looks like science. It works really well, especially with startups.
Actually, I think it's brilliant because somehow you put the decision out of your hands and into a framework or something.
Yeah. So go and have a look. Our decision diamond, Mr. Joe. It's useful, practical stuff.
Oh, awesome. And we still have like last question that arrived. We're still on time, so it's the last one. And what's your take on accessibility? Many experience UX designer neglect, for instance, response time.
So accessibility is law. I mean, that's the thing it comes down to. Is you've got things like in the UK, like Disability Discrimination Act. You've got in the US, you've got the Americans with Disability Act, ADA. You've got law on your side with accessibility. That's the difference. If something's not accessible, it's breaking the law. Simple as that. It's got to be done. There's no questions asked in terms of doing it. There are some grey areas in accessibility, but again, just get the lawyers involved. If the lawyers are involved, people will do it. It needs to be done. And if somebody's not, a UX designer's not on board with accessibility, they're not doing their job properly enough. Okay, simple as that. All right, and they're not probably a UX designer. They're just a designer.
Okay, awesome answer. I think it was a perfect way to end the webinar. Thanks a lot for your time. Where can we?
Thank you. So you find me, Mr. Joe, mrjoe.uk. All the stuff here as I've talked about today is up there.
Okay, perfect. And let's remind people, like we have the awesome BAD conference next week with Joe speaking there and his workshop as well at the end. So hope you enjoyed the webinar. Enjoy your day. Joe, also meeting you. Have a great time, and it was.
Thank you.
And say hi to your dog.
Yeah, we'll do. Thanks very much. Thank you very much for your time, Alexis. Thank you very much, everybody. I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye now.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Here it's no. Now's the awkward moment. I always need to finish this webinar.